Welcome. My name is Ed Bogish. I'm the Executive Director of SyracuseCoE. We are New York State's Center of Excellence in Environmental and Energy Systems. It's my great pleasure to call this group here at SyracuseCoE to order, and also about a dozen or so folks who have registered to listen in to this presentation via the web. At the outset, I acknowledge with respect the Onondaga Nation, firekeepers of the Haudenosaunee, the indigenous peoples on whose ancestral lands Syracuse University now stands. And it is a great privilege to host this monthly Research and Technology Forum. As you know, folks who have attended these before, at SyracuseCoE, we have a monthly program of Research and Technology Forums. This is a program that's brought to you by our partner program. I want to recognize Tammy Rosanio. If your firm or institution is not currently a partner of the SyracuseCoE, we invite you to have a conversation with us about the benefits of partnership with us. Also, I can't resist to recognize Dr. Neil Murphy, who's in the house here at SyracuseCoE. It was 21 years ago, almost today, that at an office at O'Brien and Geer, where Neil was serving as CEO of O'Brien and Geer, he convened a group of companies and universities from Central New York to discuss opportunities for collaboration. And it was in that conversation that the idea for the SyracuseCoE was conceived. And I want to thank Neil for his leadership, both at OBG and SUNY College of Environmental Science and Forestry, where he now serves as a senior fellow. And it's great to have Neil here. And also Gina Lee Glauser, Vice President for Research from Clarkson University, who served previously as Vice President for Research at Syracuse University. And I had the privilege of reporting to Gina in her capacity of Vice President for Research at Syracuse University. So it's great. Got lots of other folks here. It's a great day in Syracuse and a great day for SyracuseCoE. I'm pleased to introduce the speakers who will deliver today's presentation on the Skaneateles Lake data review and gap analysis for hazardous algal blooms. We have three presenters. Tony Leonardo, technical manager from OBG, part of Ramboll. Dave Matthews from Upstate Freshwater Institute, and Elizabeth Morin, president of Ecologic. You've seen their bios in our announcement, and I'm going to spare our airtime by saying that this is a terrific group, and we're very pleased to have them give this presentation. With that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Tony. Thanks very much. Join me in welcoming.
Well, thanks for your time, folks, and participation today. I appreciate it. So a few words first. You know, the work we're talking about today is near and dear to me personally. I'm a ecologist, born and raised in Mephisto, New York. So, you know, we're going to talk broadly about all the lakes in upstate New York, but then eventually Skaneateles Lake as well. And you know, I think we all are here today because we recognize how vital they are to our quality of life. So it's a great honor to have a chance to talk to you all today about them. It's also a great honor to be here today with a few of my key colleagues on the good and Dave and great partners on the project we're talking about here. You know, happy as always to have this collaboration. And of course, our colleagues are very well. Thank you to Amy Kincannon, who worked closely with us on a number of these items we're going to talk about today. Okay, so the purpose of the slideshow today is really to share with you all where we stand right now, trying to get an understanding of what's going on with both lakes throughout New York State, but then also with Skaneateles. And I'd like to preface kind of the slideshow today to say that we're developing a working understanding. The data that we're going to share and analyses are still ongoing, and so we want to share what we've learned so far, but also understand that the results are preliminary, and we're still working to develop a stronger understanding bloom program, kind of confined at the state scale, and some associated planning efforts, so you all are kind of aware of what's going on there. And we'll delve into some details, as I mentioned, as it relates to Skaneateles Lake specifically, some of the preliminary findings of the analyses that we've done there so far. And then lastly, we'll close out with some comments on the next steps and what we anticipate going forward from here as we work on translating the science into management action. Before I go any further, of course, this is this will be an informal gathering here, so by all means, feel free to jump in with questions now as we go. It'll be a more interesting experience for all I guess. Okay, so just to start with some review for folks maybe who are a little new to this topical area. One of the things we're going to be talking about today are harmful algae blooms. In freshwater systems, these blooms consist of visible patches of cyanobacteria. These are, as it's screen here, they're generally blue or green, yellow, brown. They have no minimum size, and they're, they generally kind of resemble here, as we say, pieces, streaks, floating dots, or pumps. And if you go online, you can kind of understand a little bit more about DEC bloom classification. Here's just some more views and get a sense of what we're talking about. They can be, in some cases, lake-wide blooms, or in some cases, maybe just a smaller topic bloom. But still, you get that same kind of green. These are occurring now throughout not only lakes in the United States, New York, but also that appear at increasing prevalence throughout the United States. Okay. All right, so why do we care about HABs? Of course, they're well known now that they can impact local economies to the tune of, in some cases, millions if there's food and beverage operations involved, especially concern over property usage and belly loss, fish and wildlife impact, and of course, human health risks as well. In light of that, New York State's invested since 2017 $2.5 billion in the clean infrastructure, clean water infrastructure act. But yet, despite those investments, we still, of course, see these kind of headlines in our SyracuseCoE page, clearly raising concern about the prevalence of HABs in our water bodies. In light of that, the New York State DEC has initiated a HABs program. You can go online and learn about DEC's program through the HABs program guide here. DEC has a HABs coordinator. There's information up there. You can always have contact for information. But there are some key things to point out here that relate to the position on HABs to the public. One theme here being know it, avoid it, report it. So in other words, particularly if you find yourself in and around water bodies, often you should be familiarizing yourself with what they look like. If you think you see a HAB, you should be avoiding it because whether it's a toxic bloom or not, it still might be mental health risk. And then lastly, report it. So there's a reporting situation. Again, you can get that information online. One of the neat resources that New York State has now, I think this will work. I'll go ahead and take the bait. Is let's see, I didn't get a chance to try this before. Yeah, let's see if this goes up. The DEC has established this great kind of interactive web page now. You click on it, this information comes up to begin with. Again, that same theme of know it, avoid it, report it, and then you can zoom in and get information. So right now you can see that there's a potential bloom reported here in Hiawatha Lake. There's some interesting things you do here. You can click through and get a sense of, so there's the photo, again, kind of underscoring some of those visual characteristics that I was sharing before. So a great resource that's available now for folks in the public to get a sense of what's going on. Okay, one of the other things that was established late in 2017 was Governor Cuomo initiated his 4-point HABs program, and what that consisted of was notion of priority lake identification. So we wanted to get a sense of what are some of the, not necessarily highest priority lakes in terms of we only care about these lakes, but which lakes can we look at to get a sense of what's going on globally throughout New York State. So once we get a handle on those lakes, might be able to take some lessons learned and apply them elsewhere. So in light of that priority lake identification, regional summits were held to try and get feedback from community members as it relates to recommended actions, and then ultimately action plan development and implementation. I apologize for the narrow slide. And then this action plan development will be where we focus in the slide. All right, so there are 12 lakes selected throughout New York State, and for each lake, again, this was known last year. Couple of action plans developed, and the contents of those plans are kind of summarized here. So ultimately, these plans included a number of recommended actions. And so those actions are being rolled out now through various state funding streams. One of the key recommended actions as it relates to the Skaneateles Lake Council is the data review effort that was conducted over the past 6 months or so. We'll talk about today. All right. A little more detail on the action plans. These were multi-agency engagement efforts. So a number of state agencies got together to develop these action plans and involve hundreds of individuals, both from local agencies and NGOs, community leaders. And the other key piece here of these action plans is that they're based on scientific foundations, and in particular, item 3 here, watershed and water quality data and analysis. So what are we trying to do here? Well, for lack of a better term, we're trying to understand at the state scale what were the key drivers for HABs in New York State. Why are they occurring? And then we also looked into, as it relates to each specific action plan, some of the lake-specific triggers. Okay, so what are the big picture drivers? What's going on across New York State that seem to be related to the prevalence of HABs? The variation of prevalence of HABs, and then also relevant to the triggers. I'm going to focus here in the interest of time, and then we'll delve into Skaneateles Lake a bit more after that today. All right, so we tried to get a better sense. Again, I got that myself here. We tried to get a better sense of what's going on in lakes throughout New York State. And in order to do that, we conducted a statistical modeling effort, looking at things such as water chemistry, lake morphology, watershed characteristics, and some other biological factors. Okay. So we can delve into the details if folks are interested, but I'm going to kind of skip to one of the ways that we compile all the results, and that's through a compilation of the statistical scores for these various models we run to try and get a handle on, again, what are the drivers of HABs throughout New York State. So these lower scores here, these just mean these are better, these indicate better statistical models, in other words, better models of what's going on HABs. And you try and parse through this very strategically, looking at various variables, because it can be confounding when you look at one variable, well, maybe it's actually something else. So we try and work through it strategically to arrive at some reasonable conclusions. And I'll cut to the chase here to say that what we found is that really the best model we have currently for drivers or other supporting factors of harmful elements throughout New York State is represented by this bottom line here. It seems as though increasing levels of total phosphorus in our lakes, alkaline conditions, so higher pH waters, the presence of zebra mussels, longer lakes with longer touches, these long drawn-out lakes, like the Finger Lakes. The orientation of lakes seem to matter. We'll talk about that a bit more. Okay, so all these factors were relating. These seem to be the key things really driving prevalence of harmful elements. So increasing levels of total phosphorus, increasing levels of alkalinity, longer lakes, presence of zebra mussels, and the matter of lake orientation. So the long axis of the lake doesn't matter. That is a question, Tom?
Are there any long lakes that don't have zebra mussels?
Good question. So, any long lakes? I'm going to just say I don't. Yeah.
Long Lake in the Adirondacks.
Well, we say Lake George. Okay, so Lake George has zebra mussels, but they're controlled. And so there's they might have small populations, but annually the folks there, But that's your question though raises a good point, which is what kind of due diligence did we do as it relates to some of these fetch and orientation variables and things like that. So that's where save folks in the room a lot of discussion over the statistical approach here. We kind of strategically remove and put variables back in and tinker with the structure of the model to parse out whether we feel that the presence of a certain variable in the model and associated result is just a matter of random chance that it just happen to work better, or there's some underlying issues with data versus there's something real to it. And as it stands right now, I feel pretty good that we've beat this up pretty well and looked at it a few different ways. That there is some level of reality to this. I'll tell you that the one variable that I kind of scratched my head about the most is this notion of orientation. So what we find here is that lakes with a northwest orientation seem to have a greater susceptibility, but the underlying, that's just the pattern. We've observed the pattern. I can't sit here and tell the group that I have nailed down the underlying problem. Right? It seems to be a pattern of data, but it's that one we think one among many that we need to put in more time. This notion of longer fetch lengths, there does seem to be more, something to that. You could imagine a longer lake is a greater surface area across which there could be wind-driven accumulation of silent bacteria or other cross-species later to this volume. Moving one direction. Any questions? Thanks. I'll skip this. This is just basically a numerical way of just saying what I've just said. So the purpose of this figure is just to give folks a sense of what these findings look like with some data. So what each point here on the screen represents is a lake, and this is the observed frequency of harmful algae blooms in a given lake across years. So in some cases, you see some ones up here. What these points might represent is either a lake where 5 years out of 5 there is a harmful algae bloom, or in some cases, some of these lakes there's only 1 year of data, so it's 1 year out of 1. Right? Values of 0.5 would mean, again, 2 years out of the past 4 there's a harmful algae bloom in that lake, and so forth. So what you can see though is that with total phosphorus, what's the strongest variable associated with the prevalence or variation of harmful algae blooms across the state. You can see the general increasing pattern, but boy, there's a lot of scatter around the data. Right? And that line fits nicely in the middle of the cloud, but it's kind of a big cloud. So what else is going on? Well, this is where, again, that fetch length matter comes into play. If you account for fetch length, now you can see that these are lakes with relatively short fetches, and these are lakes with relatively long fetches. And now that envelope associated with total phosphorus starts to account for the data a little better. Now another factor that I mentioned before, the presence of zebra mussels, zebras and cloud mussels. It's interesting, you delve in the data for lakes across the state, it's pretty clear. The typical prevalence, the typical frequency of HABs in lakes without the DREISSENID mussels is about 0.2, so 2 years out of 10, you're getting a bloom in lakes without DREISSENID. Okay, and then the typical value for lakes with DREISSENID every year. So the effect of the zebras and QUAGGAS seems to be pretty substantial, given what we've seen so far in the data. And what I'm showing here, this just gives you a sense of if you aren't really aware with zebra mussels here, what they do. They coat the bottoms of lakes, and what they do, as my child is telling us here, reminding me to tell you guys, is that they perform some selective grazing of the lake biota that favors cyanobacteria, and they also transform phosphorus into a more biologically available form. So again, not only do we have a pattern, but we have a reasonable possible underlying mechanism. All right, so I won't get into detail here, but if you start to account for all those different variables and a few others, that cloud of data I mentioned before starts to become much more better covered by our model. And you can run various scenarios of our statistical model and start to get a better sense of what's actually going on. So during this first portion of the slideshow, again, if our goal here was to try and get a handle on what's going on across New York State as it relates to variation in the prevalence of harmful algae blooms across next into matter and labor orientation as well. And there's other variables that we're still spending more time looking at. There's a ton of debate and literature about the role of nitrogen, nitrogen levels in lakes and how that relates to algal. There's still some more work to do there as well. Okay. So that was the view from across the state. I'm going to turn it over to Dave now, who's going to delve a bit into more detail now and tell you about Skaneateles Lake. Thanks.
All right, Skaneateles Lake, obviously a regional gem, long known for perhaps the best water quality in the state, and the source of the water that we drink. So a very important lake regionally. One thing, if you look at the Google Earth image, there we go, over here, one thing we'll talk about a little bit, but the prevalence of agriculture in the area is pretty obvious from the Google Earth image. There's a large forested area down on the southwestern. So it's a long, narrow lake, about 15 miles long, on average about a mile wide. It's a deep lake, almost 300 feet at the deepest part. It's a lithotrophic, meaning it has a low level of primary productivity or phytoplankton growth, high water clarity, oxygen doesn't deplete, basically high water quality. As I mentioned, it's the municipal water supply for the city of Syracuse, and importantly, it is unfiltered. It has a waiver because of its high quality. About 45% of the watershed is actively used for agriculture, and there are over 1,000 residences located on the lake as well. Of course, the village of Skaneateles is located in the north end of the lake. There are many tributaries to the lake, many of them small, intermittent, which can make managing loads that enter the lake a little more difficult than other lakes. Some lakes, maybe you have one or two large streams or large sources of nutrients that therefore are more easily targeted and managed. That's not the case in Skaneateles. And as many of you may know, harmful algal blooms were reported in the lake first in 2017, and then again in 2018. So Tony's presentation, we're 2 for 2. Not really where we want to be. It's also important to note that this is not an issue specific to Skaneateles Lake. In 2017, all of the 11 Finger Lakes reported harmful algal blooms. I think it was all 11 last year, but it was certainly the vast majority of them. So this is clearly, a regional, actually global issue. So the project that we worked on, the Skaneateles Lake data gap analysis, really had a few different components. The first was to identify data gaps that might prevent us from eventually calibrating and using watershed and water quality models to better understand the lake. And so we compiled, when I say we, I should say Susan O'Donnell, my colleague, who worked extremely hard on this and did all the really hard work, compiled data from various sources and evaluated its status relative to these requirements for a quality assurance plan, and that the data was analyzed at a laboratory that's accredited by the Department of Health's Environmental Lab Approval Program. And so we identified gaps where they existed and essentially evaluated the provenance of the data and its ability to be used in further studies. We also did a trend analysis on available meteorological data and inlake data, and that's what I'm really going to be talking about today. Finally, this is going to be summarized in a report that's currently in draft format under review, and hopefully that'll be out soon. So the trend analyses that we did, we used two different methods to evaluate whether trends were statistically significant. The first is simple linear regression. So that's a parametric approach that works best when we're dealing with normal distributions. It's appropriate when we're looking at linear trends and monotonic trends, so trends that are going in just one direction. Not going to help you when you have ups and downs. And it works well with kind of annual or summer average values. We also use the seasonal Kendall test, which is a non-parametric test. It doesn't have the requirements for normal distributions. It tends to perform pretty well when there are outliers in the data. Again, really only works well on monotonic trends, but it also works on some nonlinear trends as well. That's really kind of a preferred test when we have seasonal data. So when you have like monthly data or bi-weekly data, that's really the preferred way to go. Our approach was to say we're gonna do both. There isn't one best test, and when the results concur, that's going to give us more confidence that a trend is real. So we'll start by talking about meteorological data, so temperature data, precipitation data, and wind data. And the first thing we had to decide was, okay, there are 9 meteorological stations in the vicinity of Skaneateles Lake. Which one should we use? And you can see they're numbered there on the orange dots, 1 to 9. 1 is the Syracuse Airport. 8 and 9 are down by So this is a listing of those MET sites, and they had different periods of record, different parameters that were measured over different frequencies. What we opted to do was to focus on the Syracuse Airport data. Even though it's not the closest site, it had the most complete record, seemed to be the most robust data set, and it could do everything that we needed. And because our focus here is really on broader regional weather conditions, we didn't feel it was necessary or important to look at data right at the shore of the lake. However, when it comes to watershed and in-lake modeling, I think we would definitely make use of some of these other meteorological stations. So we'll look at some data. So these are long-term time series of air temperature measured at the Syracuse Airport. The top panel are annual average air temperatures, and the bottom panel are summer average temperatures. We're beginning in 1950 and running through 2017. And I should preface this by saying I'm a limnologist. I'm not a climate scientist. So if there are any here, close your eyes. There are probably more elegant ways to look at this data, but we're looking at it through the lens of, well, what are meteorological variables that may affect the probability of HABs? So we're focusing on temperature, on precip, and on wind. So whether we look at it annually or on a summer average, there's really no declining, that there have been increases in air temperature. And that result was confirmed by both linear regression and the Siegel-Kendall test. And if you drill down a little further, 7 of the last 8 years, we exceeded the long-term average of 67.5 degrees. I don't think this result is probably news to anyone here, but it's an important fact for us. We also wanted to drill down a little further and say, well, has there been an increase in extremely warm days that may be related to the occurrence of HABs? So we arbitrarily said, well, we're just going to look at the number of days that are greater than 85 degrees and see if that's changed over the long term. The answer is no, it hasn't. There is no significant trend. However, again, if you zoom in on the years since 2010, there has been an increase in the number of warm days compared to the period before that. But nothing statistically significant should happen. Moving on to precipitation. We looked at this 2 ways, in terms of total annual precipitation, and then we looked at the occurrence of intense rainfall events, so rainfall events with rainfall greater than an inch. Again, we're looking at the 1950 to 2017 interval. We saw no long-term trend in total precipitation. However, there does seem to be a cyclical pattern where we had higher precipitation in the 50s, lower in the 60s, really high in the 70s, lower in the 80s, and so on. So it looks like maybe we're on a little bit of an upswing, but no consistent long-term trend. And in the lower panel, the number of days with rainfall greater than an inch, really, again, you see the cyclical pattern, but really nothing consistent. And from folks that live around here, that maybe is a little bit surprising, because it feels like we're having an awful lot of these localized, very intense events. There were 2 very large ones in July of 2017 at the southern end of Skaneateles Lake that folks speculated may have been associated with the HAB that occurred later. And even this year, we have been monitoring 10 tributaries to Skaneateles Lake, and we've been trying to capture some storm events, and there was a doozy just this past Thursday. So this is Grout Brook, looking upstream. I think that's upstream. Near the mouth where it enters the lake, and the stream actually came up over the bridge. This is the southern end of the lake. I think you can tell that's brown. That's not the way Skaneateles Lake typically looks. If you look close, you can see the edges of the lake discoloration, but this is a neat photo of the southern end because it shows the waterfalls from the many small tribs that enter the lake, and maybe highlight some of the issues we're trying to control these disparate inputs. And on the left here, this is Bear Swamp Creek. This is the bridge that our folks used to sample from. It got wiped out. And this is Randall Gulf, a small tributary down on the southeastern end of the lake. And maybe you can see that big muddy in there. So these pictures are pretty impressive. If you want to see some good ones, talk to Rich Abbott. I just saw some a little while ago that are better than what I have. So, so when you see this type of thing, and it sure feels like it's happening more often. I think what it speaks to is maybe we need to do some further analyses some more detailed analysis to see if this type of thing really is more. I should mention the spatial heterogeneity of that event. So at the Syracuse Airport, they measured 0.8 of an inch of rain. Casanova got like 3.5 inches. Oswego got something more than that. It just varied widely, moving 10 or 20 miles down the road. And that seems to be normal. So, looking at wind, we saw one interesting effect. We focused in on the months of August, September, and October, because those are really HABsy months. That's when we tend to see more HABs. And we looked at the monthly average wind speed in those months, looking at the time period from 1980 moving out to 2018. We also looked at the number of calm days in these months as a long-term time series. And we define calm days as days when average wind speeds are less than 5 miles per hour and maximum wind speed for that day is less than 10. There may be other ways to look at it. But we were really struck by this decrease in September, a pretty dramatic decrease in average wind speeds, and also a pretty large increase in the number of calm days. I can't explain it. It was interesting, and certainly would tend to promote HABs. They can control their buoyancy and stay up at the top of the water column. They can do that a lot better when it's calm. September is a big month for them. Water tends to be warm. Nutrient ratios tend to be favorable. So I'm going to leave it there. I don't know exactly what this means, but it's too interesting not to share. Maybe it's just an anomaly in the data, but it sure does. So now we're going to move on to in-lake trends, and we looked at 8 different variables. I'm going to talk today about the first 4, temperature, and then trophic state indicators, Secchi-Dis, total phosphorus, and chlorophyll A. Nitrate, soluble active phosphorus, silica, and hypomagnetic oxygen depletion. Happy to talk to you about it, but they were really kind of boring. So we really wanted to pick the highlights here, the things that were most interesting. And I want to mention that this data came from many sources. I'm not going to mention them all, but particularly important ones include the Citizen Statewide Lake Assessment Program, which is run by NYSDEC and New York State Federation of Lake Associations. The Finger Lake Institute has done an awful lot of data collection in the Finger Lakes. The city of Syracuse has a very long-term program of water quality measurements in the lake. The town of Skaneateles was particularly proactive early on, before we had any problems. They were making investments in monitoring of the lake, and some of that work was done by my shop, the Upstate. So there were many, many locations in the lake where data was collected. And one of the first things we needed to do was to narrow that down and say, okay, what sites are we going to include? We don't want to muddy the water, so to speak, by including sites in the lake that have significantly different water quality. So fortunately, the city of Syracuse has been collecting temperature and Secchi-Dis measurements at 8 sites down the center line of the lake since 1975. So this is a great data set. And what we wanted to use it to do was to tell us, okay, how does water quality vary spatially within the lake? And this is really small. The details aren't important. What is important is that you see that site 1 corresponds to this site moving south, site 8 is this site, and that the northernmost and southernmost distributions of SECI, which is a measure of water clarity, differ markedly from the distributions in the middle of the lake. So if you're between these sites, if you're from 2 to 7, water quality is essentially the same. But we didn't want to use these locations on the end where clarity is clearly significantly lower than it is in the rest. So thanks to the city for providing that data. It was useful. So these are all the sites that we could find where water quality has been measured on the lake, going back to 1910 with versions a day, and we focused on the sites that were between these two lines, avoided the ends of the lake. And again, details of this table aren't important, but for each site, we identified the years the data was collected, who collected it, at what sites, and then further what parameters, whether there was a quality assurance plan in place, whether the data was analyzed at lab, lab, etc. So these are long-term trends in water temperature. These are summer averages. The top plot is the upper water, so we're just looking at 0 to 6 meter depth. Lower plot, we're looking at the lower waters, down to 60 meter depth. And what we see in the upper waters, there's been a significant long-term increase in water temperature, and that increase is parallel to the increase in air temperature. That makes perfect sense. And in the lower waters, we really don't see a trend, right? We see a lot of ups and downs, but nothing organized. And this is looking at from the early 70s through 2018. If we focus in on the more recent period from 1996 through 2018, we continue to see an increase in surface water temperatures, although it's a little stronger increase in more recent years. But now we see a significant decrease in temperatures in the lower waters. And at first that may seem counterintuitive, but this is something that we typically see in lakes, is that when they stratify early in the season, warmer springs, that locks in the colder waters in the bottom. When stratification is delayed to later in the summer, those lower waters have more time to heat. So while that may seem counterintuitive, it actually makes pretty good sense. And the reason we care about this is because stronger stratification, warmer upper waters and colder lower waters creates a more stable environment that favors cyanobacteria over other phytoplankton, and that's because they can get colder points. So we zoomed in a little bit and looked at, well, what's water temperature doing during the HAB months again, during August, September, and October. So these are our monthly average temperatures from 1980 through 2018. And we see that during each of these months, there are significant, statistically significant increases in upper water temperatures. The strongest increase was observed in October. All right, moving on to common indicators of trophic state. Upper panel is total phosphorus. Nutrient that typically limits phytoplankton growth in lakes. Second panel is chlorophyll A. That's a surrogate for phytoplankton biomass. The photosynthetic pigment is common to all phytoplankton. And the lowest panel is SECI transparency, so a measure of water clarity. And really all of these things are indicators of the biomass or standing crop of phytoplankton. So we're looking at the period from 1971 to 2018, and the blue line there represents just a simple linear regression. And if you look at it this way, we see long-term decrease in total phosphorus. Really nothing going on with respect to chlorophyll A, and an increase in second disc depth. I should say, I forgot, chlorophyll A, actually what we did see, not a trend, but we do see increased variability. So here, chlorophyll concentrations were more stable during the summer. Now they tend to bounce around more, higher highs, lower lows, which is an interesting observation. However, you also will notice, gosh, there's some big gaps in the data in the earlier years. And looking at the data this way, there's a couple pretty highly influential points, really high values in the early part of the record, which really make these results pretty questionable, right? Some of these things we understand. 1972 was Hurricane Agnes. But that was a huge storm in this area. And all the lakes we look at, 1972, the numbers tend to be really, really high. So it's an outlier, but there's good reason to believe it was real. So what we did is we zoomed in on the more recent time interval when we have more data. So starting in 1996 and moving out to the present day, we see a significant increase in total phosphorus concentrations, significant increase in chlorophyll concentrations, and a decrease in second disc or water clarity. So none of that's really what we want to see. None of that's good or going in favorable direction. I will say all of these values, total phosphorus value, anything less than 5, chlorophyll less than 1, second disc that averages 8, 9, 10 meters. There are hundreds of lakes in New York State that killed that water quality that bad, right? I mean, this is still a beautiful lake. It's just relative to earlier conditions. So we looked at some seasonal trends in water clarity. So moving from May, June, July, August, September, October, looking at the trend from 1996 to 2018. And pretty interesting stuff. We actually see water clarity in May has improved pretty markedly. But in these HABs months, August, September, it's gotten significantly worse. And these May observations, I know we've been out there a number of years in May, and it is striking. We've had 20 meter second disc values. I know Rich has seen some in that range. In the spring, the water clarity really has improved markedly. Potential explanations for these patterns, you know, these decreases would be consistent with maybe different phytoplankton composition, maybe more blue-greens. They're going to be around in August and September. In May, typically what you see are diatoms, a form of phytoplankton that might be more easily grazed by invasive mussels. Anyway, we don't have all the answers, but we do have some questions and some hypotheses that we hope to investigate further. So major conclusions are that we have increasing air temperatures No question about that, and increasing temperatures in Skaneateles Lake and the upper waters. We saw a similar, actually a stronger increase in surface water temperatures in Algal Lake in a previous analysis that we did. And this is consistent with what people have seen across the country. Lake temperatures. In terms of precipitation, we didn't see any long-term trends, and we didn't see any trends either in the number of extremely warm days. Total phosphorus concentrations have certainly increased since 1996, but they remain lower than some of the high values we saw back in the 1970s. So some long-term perspective does provide value here. Sometimes the good old days weren't so good, right? The water quality in Skaneateles Lake in the 70s was significantly worse. Chlorophyll concentrations have also increased since 1996, but again, they're similar now to what they were in the 1970s. And SyracuseCoE values have decreased since 1996, and those decreases have been particularly strong in August and September, the months where cyanobacteria tend to help in other accidents. So that's all I've got. I'm happy to talk to folks now or later if you have questions. Just
Transition to the next.
yes, we're going to move on.
Question here.
I do have one question that's specific to your information from Morris De Silva. He says, for the temperatures, I would like to see how it compares to the air temperature, because it looks like the Nyquist theorem has not been applied when gathering data. It may be useless to just collect data that does not have a New York meaning or an NY meaning, maybe he means Nyquist. That is why we are so mistaken with the concept of global warming. What is the speaker's opinion on my statement?
Who is the technologist, Jim? Yeah, I don't have an opinion. All I can tell you is that we collected the data from NOAA, plotted it up, and then that's what we saw.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, Dave. I was actually just in, we had a major on Untitled Lake during the storm last week. And my question, looking at Skaneateles' relationship to the ag fields and watching perhaps what's happening south with the sugar plantations in Lake Okeechobee. If we don't notice a difference in major precipitous events, do we notice a relationship between the events that are reported and the ag calendar? Like when liquid manure is applied to fields, things like that, that would perhaps add.
That's not something that I've seen. I think in general, that good practice for manure spreading is to avoid wet weather to the extent possible. It isn't always possible, maybe to uncertain forecasts, or our storage is full and we have to put it somewhere. But really, I have not investigated, the co-occurrence of these extreme events and their application. Okay, next, my colleague, Dr. Liz Moran, is going to talk about next steps, where we go from here and what that process might look like.
Well, okay, so I get to bring the happy news of things are changing, but maybe there are ways to help mitigate and moderate those changes. And the framework, kind of the theme of my portion of this presentation, is moving from science to management. So you've seen a lot of plots, analyses of what are factors that are affecting HABs, what we see as trends over time. The framework that we typically used in New York State and actually nationally for watershed planning and lake management is a master plan that kind of goes through a 4-step process. So step 1 is this, where are we now? And that's gathering all of this information. So again, as we're looking ahead to the future management alternatives for Skaneateles Lake, it's very important that we gather all of this information and do the analysis that my colleagues from OPG and State Freshwater have reported on. But in addition to the scientific data, the data on the lakes and the tributaries and the weather and the biological community, we also need to factor in the human community. So in New York, we've embraced a concept called ecosystem-based management, which puts people right in the picture of trying to manage our land and water and air resources. So recognizing that Skaneateles Lake serves multiple purposes, right? It's a high-quality habitat for plants and animals, it's a drinking water source, it's a recreational resource, it's an incredible community asset. So people need to come together, be educated, figure out what it is that they're doing and how that affects their water quality, and then come up with a strategic plan. So that's step 1 is kind of gathering information. Step 2 is where are we going, and we've seen that. You know, we've seen some really interesting plots about where are we going in Skaneateles Lake that are we're seeing across the New York State Finger Lakes. Where do we want to be? That's bringing the community back together for some visioning and priority setting. And then the plan itself is how do we get there? So what are we going to do? If there's no magic wand, you know, we can't reorient the lake, so the texture's different. The zebra mussels and quagga mussels are there. So what can we do? We know that the climate is continuing to get warmer. So given that, and given the factors that came out of Tony's analysis, looks like the most effective strategies are going to be to control the inputs, right? Focus on phosphorus primarily, but keeping nitrogen kind of in the back of our minds because we know that this is an emerging area of research as well. So the management plan has specific goals and strategies of what to do. So how does modeling fit into this picture? How do we deal with modeling when we're doing the watershed management plan? The value of the modeling work that is part of the watershed management plan is building on all this site-specific data and knowledge that we have, as you see. That our data gap project helped us understand where we need more information and how to direct monitoring and analysis resources to fill those data gaps in order to progress with modeling tasks. Once the models, lake and watershed models are done, and of course the modeling framework helps us develop that management plan by testing out our scenarios, right? So what should we do, where, when, why, what should we focus on? So not only does that help us direct our resources, it also builds community awareness and understanding and support and trust in the science. The challenge that we have in Skaneateles Lake and most of our New York State Finger Lakes is these diffuse sources of nutrients. So there's no magic wand and there's no single pipe that we can go to and, you know, try to control that input. So all of these decisions in the future that are going to affect Skaneateles Lake are made at the municipal level, the individual level, the homeowner level. So a lot of it depends on education. So we need to really start to get people to understand what models are, what non-point source runoff is, how this all works together, what we can do in terms of municipal codes and things to try to control it, but also recognize that you can have a microburst of 5 inches of water and there's not a lot of best management practices that are going to keep that runoff from entering your lake. So given that, various partners are embarking on what they call a 9 element plan for Skaneateles Lake. This is the framework that New York State is now using, that 4-step framework. They're putting, the EPA standard 9 element plan framework. And the reason that this all fits together, my part of the talk, Tony's part, Dave's part, is that the HABs Action Plan that kicked off this meeting, the #1 priority for the short term was to perform modeling of in-lake and watershed conditions in order to advance a 9 element plan. So the town of Skaneateles successfully applied for funding from the New York State Department of State Local Waterfront Revitalization Program. That program is going to get started. It's being managed by the Central New York Regional Planning and Development Board with lots of partners, including many people in this room, but also PEC, the Lake Association, the City of Syracuse, Soil and Water Conservation District, and others. So that's what's coming next. And I'm just kind of thinking over my company, Ecologic, we've been doing watershed management planning in various finger lakes. I'm thinking about what do all of these efforts have in common, and how can we kind of build collaboratively and share information. So I think it's really important that people are aware of what's happening in other lakes, lessons learned, things to focus on. But each of our lake plans also is unique in that it reflects the community values and priorities. So for example, Skaneateles Lake, 45% agricultural land use, a lot of investment by the City of Syracuse over the years in agricultural management practices. There's a lot to be learned from that. And also, there's opportunities here, probably people in this forum in particular are interested in how to apply technology and science for monitoring what's going on in the lake, early warning, kind of prevention, the question about do you spread manure when it's going to rain. There are predictive tools now in models that can be used to help make those individual decisions. Again, a lot of the decisions are made at the granular level. So we can get science and technology for monitoring, for modeling, and also for adaptation. So we need to keep finding ways to measure the effectiveness of our actions and see if we can try to intervene in ways that will protect Skaneateles Lake and others for their long-term designated uses. So that's my pitch, that we're going to have to rely on science and technology to save us all, and that public education, belief in science, has to be a very strong community value for us. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do. There's one piece of it that I think really needs to be addressed is intervention, because you can have outreach, you can have the educational pieces, you can have those best management practices, known, but if you're not intervening to be sure that they're implemented, then you're still leaving.
That's a challenge. We have watershed rules and regulations to help with that. Not every watershed has that, but Skaneateles is among the ones that do have very effective ones. Owasco is currently trying to revise theirs to be more effective, but it's true. Agricultural operations are exempt from many of the Clean Water Act provisions. So working with agriculture producers, farmers, is a kind of voluntary incentive-based program. So, you can get funding to implement practices, cost sharing, but again, it's a lot of individual persuasion, it's boots on the ground, and one of the recommendations in all of the HABs Action Plan, was to increase the capacity of the local soil and water conservation districts, because they're the ones that are actually making those personal connections to the farmers. So you're right, there's no hammer, there's carrots and education. Anybody else have an answer for that? That would be a good solution. And other things.
There's actually technology out there right now that's being researched on drones for nitrate levels in the soil of these farms. So there is intervention, just not extensive yet.
Do you know where that technology is being used?
Sorry.
Drone technology, do you know where it's being used?
No, not exactly yet. We had sat in, my group and I, sat on a presentation last week with coordinating hyperspectral imaging, and they have a hyperspectral sensor that can detect nitrate levels to give farmers a better recommendation of how much fertilizer to use rather than what to use.
That's a great example. There's also a lot of remote sensing applications that may help with invasive species, early detection.
Just to follow up on our student over here, I think you have a very, very strong point. There is taking that a little bit further. The whole idea of precision agriculture and satellite farming, I think offers tremendous benefit to both aid agriculture and reduce the impact of agriculture on our water resources. And I think it could well be that may be a big part of the solution in the future. We can reduce the cost of agricultural chemicals to the farmer. At the same time, we reduce the loss of those agricultural chemicals from the farm field to our receiving waters. Everybody wins.
I agree.
You're right on the mark.
Liz, actually, this question is to all three panels, but Tony mentioned when discussing the resin mussels, kind of under his breath that Lake George aquatics invasive species people do something with the mussels. What were you?
Yeah, oh, I'm sorry. So my understanding, I've never taken part in their program up there, but they've managed to keep ahead of the mussel invasion to the extent they're aware when populations are identified, they remove from the lake. So
how do they remove? Just mechanically?
plain old fashioned, pick them out.
It is a different setting though.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the chemistry of Lake George is not favorable to mussels. They don't have, they don't have the same problem. Doesn't seem to have the same level of susceptibility to mussels. But Tony's absolutely correct that it has been a manual removal process when they see a few.
So I think getting back to like the data analysis type of questions, we noticed there's some relationship with elevated pH, that lakes with higher pH means that maybe more susceptible. That could be related to the mussels, like they're all kind of related together. So,
My understanding too is that we think of zebra and quagga mussels, and the quagga mussels seem to survive better than the zebra mussels at greater depth. So that in some of these lakes that are lined with, I'm presuming that Skaneateles Lake is lined with quagga mussels, at 200 feet, 300 feet, whereas a lake like Otisco Lake, which is not as deep, or maybe even Owasco Lake, is not lined as much by these mussels. Is that correct thinking?
well, what I can say is that I think there's a lot to be learned about the distribution and the biomass of these organisms throughout the lake. I mean, David, you can chime in more, but I think that's something that now that we're starting to see the tremendous impact they have, getting a better handle and going out and doing measurements and surveys. And I think, Amy, you might be able to chime in here. The DEC started to do some of that survey this summer, is that right?
Hopefully.
Hopefully.
Yeah, taking a look at not just Skaneateles, but some of the other lakes as well, using a variety of different technologies, working with UFI. Otisco does go anoxic, so they're probably mostly zebras in Otisco, so that definitely has a factor. And if the lake goes anoxic, survive. So, but we're starting to look into quantifying distributions.
Has there been any work done technologically in removing mussels at depth? You know, Dan Egan talks about Lake Michigan being like the parking lot just lined with quagga mussels at the bottom. Has there been any work been done along those lines in terms of removing?
I've heard of one program that I think it started in the being piloted, I believe, in Michigan, but it's the application of a treatment for mussels. But there's not only those these organisms are such a prevalent part of our ecosystems now that removing them and doing things could cause us much harm. You know what I mean? So I think that we need to be very. I'm not saying it's not something we should be thinking about. I'm just saying we need to be very careful in advancing opinions.
And one other quickie on invasives. You know, Dan Egan in his book, The Depth and Length of the Great Lakes, points out that we've got about 186 or so invasive species that have gotten into the Great Lakes. We're experiencing the zebras and the quaggas over the last 30 years or so here locally. Are there any other invasives out there that could have an impact, such as zebra mussels and quagga mussels, that we should start thinking more seriously about in terms of prevention? Related to HABs? HABs or anything else?
I have my test.
Water chestnuts, which are hiker, and we don't know, it's about 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason that we're not interested in harvesting or getting rid of, because we don't know how that has integrated into our water system.
One of the ones I'm particularly been thinking a lot about is the hemlock foliage, right? So our hemlock, they kind of hold in place all those deep ravines around your lakes. And, we really don't want to lose those hemlocks. So,
It's that particular disease appears to be settling down. And the stands of hemlocks along the shoreline of Skaneateles, in my opinion, just observation, are healthier today than what they were 5 or 6 years ago. Yeah.
So I was at one Czech Lundgren from the DEC. She gave a presentation last year in September at Deacon, and the DEC has a map of all HABs, as you pointed out. But one thing that I learned that was quite interesting, the lakes with high phosphorus, or sometimes low phosphorus, or no phosphorus, they have observed all HABs. So they still don't know what causes HABs. So I think part of the challenge is, instead of just looking at the one source or chasing that rabbit hole, I think we need to look at it as a whole system. As not only, it's a farmers versus a lake, private owners. I think we look at it as a whole system, and that modeling as a whole system of the system modeling is the direction we need to look into.
I was wondering, I'm trying to remember when the HAB summit was, because I conferenced in, and there was a little initial trouble with the connection, but one of the things that struck me is that it is an international issue. And that I'm wondering, given it's not just Toady Lake, it's not Song Lake, it's not Skaneateles, it's all across the world. And there may be other minds working on this simultaneous, and I'm wondering, are there other things, like, I'm not saying biologics, don't go crazy, but are there other things that internationally we're finding success with, either with small lakes or big long lakes like Skaneateles, that over the next 5 years? Because we hate to throw in the towel, but it's coming to the point where people can't go in some of their lakes.
So, to your point, there's what's called the interstate, the ITRC, interstate. Gosh, I'm going to forget the Art Technology Council. I'm actually leader of the group, but we're developing a guidance just for that purpose right now that addresses in-lake treatments and then preventative measures as well to get to your point about interventions, so alternatives for interventions. I think there's a number of interventions for Skaneateles Lake laid out in the action plan, but still at this point, we have a lot of work to get there. But kind of to your point, yes, there are a lot of options, even for near-term alternatives to provide relief immediately, because I think we all recognize that we want to treat the root issues, whether they're related to landscape or inherent to the lake itself, but those are going to be longer-term initiatives. So there are a number of options in development for near-term solutions, but some of those they're just being developed now, and they need to go through vetting and permitting and all those kind of things. So there's still some work to do, but I think I'm encouraged anyway that there are some options. People, I know you thought a lot about this kind of thing too.
Yeah, I share Tony's optimism. We do know that ultrasound can have an effect on an isolated room in a bay because the cyanobacteria have vacuoles that allow them to float to go after nutrients to sink. But once those vacuoles are collapsed, there's no choice but what they settle to the bottom and die. Equally, Tony and his colleagues are working on nanobubbles of ozone. They have been looked at in the Carolinas, and they've been looked at in Japan. And there's also at ESF, we're looking at hydrodynamic cavitation oxidation, also as a treatment device. So I think there is some options, but as Tony said, there's just an awful lot of work that has to be done on those options to figure out how they can be used, what their negative consequences are, what the positive consequences are.
Can I just add, yeah, DEC is looking at this as part of the Advanced HABs initiative. So we piloted last year and this summer ultrasonic aerators, hydrogen peroxide, and nutrient activated alum in several water bodies statewide. So we did prior monitoring last year and some application last year. We'll continue monitoring and do post monitoring, and we should be issuing a report. Some of those strategies are currently not allowed in New York State, so we're trying to evaluate these.
Yeah, in our drinking water reservoir in the city, we know that aeration and ultrasonic work. They work great. It's just scaling up to a larger body of water. So for 120 million gallons, we can control algae. Get up to 412 billion gallons, we have a change. But they do work.
Seems like that's usual.
Any other questions from the West? That last call from. So my sense is we're ready for refreshments. So I want to thank the speakers. And I invite you all to join us. We got some light refreshments outside.